Count Alurgas Tuvino. I've always hated the stench of war. Even the wonderful scent of blood on the air is spoiled by the various odors that accompany it. Various fires burning questionable things, body odor, rot, and feces assault the senses whenever one is unwise enough to breathe through one's nostrils. One can become acclimatized to it given the chance, but never immune. The assault on one's nose will begin anew when one least expects it. Honestly, it even ruins the view. I watched impassively from my balcony as the new slaves sorted through their previous belongings. Anything of value will be put to use, the rest of it will be burned. Despite the stench ruining the mood, I found some amusement that the accursed drow were having to divide their own possessions in such a manner. It would have been more amusing if the reason for this task falling to the drow weren't so dire. Normally, newly created vampires would carry out tasks such as this. However, it had been so long since we had new recruits that even the youngest of us was resistant to such commands. I spat angrily at the slaves. If that damned half-breed hadn't failed, we wouldn't be in this mess. Maybe if he had known what was at stake. No, that would have been a misstep for us. It was fortunate that the memories of the fair folk are incompatible with the mind of an infant. Because he was lacking those memories, he did not know of the cycle of redemption we are doomed to face, and he could not leverage it against us. There's no doubt in my mind that had he known, he would have demanded more and more and more until there was nothing left to give. Such is the nature of a spoiled brat like Kirain Yith. May he and the bitch that birthed him suffer an eternity of torment. The Yith matriarch had seemed like an amazing boon at the time, though. When we first received word of her grievances with Lofen and his court, we approached her nearly salivating. We were desperate to improve our situation and avoid the cycle. In hindsight, it should have been alarming to us that she was salivating as well. We believed that her eagerness would help us succeed in overthrowing Lofen and taking back our home. Instead, she died and her son turned out to be an insufferable brat. Not a one of us could have foreseen the consequences of our scheming, though. It was definitely unexpected for Lofen to hear of Kirain's failure before we did, from the orcs no less. If it weren't for a few sympathetic ears in Lofen's court, we would all be waiting to be reborn by now. A good portion of us were able to avoid the hunt, of course. Lofen's lack of leadership capabilities served us well in that regard. Then the damned orcs invaded and began to hunt us as well. Now our backs are against the wall and— "You are summoned, Count Tuvino," a crow perched in a nearby tree cawed. "By whom?" I demanded, angry at the interruption. "Duke Misgiel demands your presence." "I understand," I replied in a much more reasonable tone. "I will make haste." I turned from the crow and made my way through the building that was currently acting as my manor. A meager manor, certainly, and not even close to matching my previous accommodations. The manor I had been living in, belonging to a drow countess that was quite enamored with me, was far superior in nearly every aspect. However, that manor is now destroyed, as is the family that allowed me to live there. A damn shame their blood was freely offered and quite delectable. The thought angered me as I marched through our war camp towards Duke Misgiel's lodgings. There are 3 remaining vampire dukes, and Duke Aleb Misgiel is by far the mightiest of the 3. Each of them had experimented with vampiric mastery, and each of their experiments ended in failure. Duke Bani and Duke Hilgro were both weakened by their failures, but Duke Misgiel's experiments made him much stronger. While he failed to become a master vampire, he managed to enhance his body and his vampiric abilities. He also commands more soldiers than any other vampiric noble, partly because he's a skilled tactician, and partly because he knows when to avoid a fight. There's no question that if we manage to take back the Night Kingdom, Duke Misgiel will be king, which makes this summons rather concerning, especially given recent events. "My lord!" someone shouted at me. I turned and saw a slave in tattered clothing running toward me. My jaw nearly dropped at the audacity. "My lord, we're running out of rations for the brood," she said once she caught up. "And? Well, what do we do?" "They need to be fed, my lord." I stepped toward her with a piercing glare. "I do not understand your confusion," I growled. "You claim the brood are nearly out of rations, yet you still have blood in your veins and meat on your bones." "What? Feed them!" I slammed the suggestion into her mind. "It will be done, my lord," the drow slave said vacantly. I watched angrily as she turned and went back the way she came. "Imbecilic drow," I muttered to myself as I continued on my way. They are a plague upon this land. Like most animals, they are deaf to the voices of those above them. Or perhaps they're simply incapable of the deeper understanding required to interpret those voices. Either way, the end result is an inability to accept the offer to become a vampire. Even the higher beings cannot communicate with them, and as such have limited influence over them. Most drow are also atheists, in spite of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. It is said that large gatherings of drow drive away the higher beings because they hate being ignored, but that is simply conjecture. The fact that these cretins pretend at society fills me to the brim with the fiery passions of rage. They lay claim to titles without possessing a single ounce of nobility. They pretend at being barons, counts, queens, and even kings. One need not look long to see why they are unsuitable for the duties of governance. The actions of their so-called king has allowed the orcs of the unified chiefdoms to invade all the way to their capital. Worse, the lives of the drow living in the Night Kingdom can only improve if the orcs manage to win the day. Damn them! These pretenders have held their power for far too long. It's past time that we remove this second set of titles from our kingdom. A guard signaled for me to halt as I approached the Duke's lodgings. I waited outside the massive stone structure while the guard confirmed that I was expected. At one point, the building had likely served as a guild hall for adventurers. It was modest in appearance, yet massive enough to serve an important purpose for the Duke and his entourage. The guard received an answer from within and stepped aside with a slight bow, allowing me entry. I passed the guard, stepped inside, and was immediately met with an intense bustle of activity. The Duke's peons were well at work, calling to each other about this and that over the sounds of their various activities. "Count Tuvino!" A weathered vampire greeted me with a bow. "This way, if you please." It isn't common for one as old as this to become a vampire. The fallen wilder that made the contract must have been waiting for a very long time. I followed the elderly former elf up a flight of stairs and down a long hallway. At the end of the corridor was a door that opened into a large room housing a series of large tables. Each table was covered in a variety of tomes, papers, writing utensils, and weapons. The Duke was sitting at the head of one such table, with other vampires standing and sitting around him. "Presenting Count Tuvino, your grace," the old one bowed. "Good, that will be all, Klasno. Take the servants with you," Mizgil said while waving for me to sit. I gave a respectful bow and took the offered seat, catching stares from the other nobles at the table. Each of their eyes pierced through me, knotting my stomach. There was little doubt as to why I had been summoned. "Tuvino, I trust you are well," Mizgil said with an air of hostility. "Yes, your grace," I replied, averting eye contact. "Thank you for asking." "Good. Now we haven't had a chance to debrief regarding what was his name?" he asked, grabbing a sheaf of papers from the table. "Master General Kirain Yith." "Yes, we haven't had a chance to discuss this matter yet." I stayed silent, allowing the Duke to read from the papers. "You were entrusted with Yith's well-being, were you not?" Mizgil asked after a few moments. "Yes, your grace." "Then why did he fail?" "Because he foolishly underestimated the orcs." "Oh?" the Duke asked angrily. "Was it not your responsibility to weed out such foolishness?" "With respect, your grace, I must protest such an assertion," I replied, offended. "One cannot forcefully remove a thing which is integral to one's being. Yith was half drow, and his mother was a queen amongst fools." A murmur of agreement came from the other nobles, but died out quickly once the Duke raised his hand for silence. "So you say. Yet Kirain Yith was competent enough to infiltrate Lofin's military and rise to its peak." "Respectfully, your grace, I must once again protest. Lofin does not select his generals based on merit, but rather on the lack thereof. Yith's rise in the false king's military speaks more toward his foolishness than it does his competence. We should have expected as such from a half-breed," a noble whom I didn't know muttered. "Silence!" Duke Mizgil shot the noble a glare before turning back to me. "So you claim no responsibility for this?" "No, Duke, I do not." "And why not?" "Because I did as I was bade, your grace. I provided counsel, ensured that the child would grow to be as competent as possible, and even supported his ill-conceived strategies. There was simply nothing further I could have done." "Duke Hillgrow's plan was doomed from the start," another noble said. "There are those of us who knew this from the moment a half-breed was mentioned." More mutters of agreement sounded from the other nobles. Duke Mizgil stared at the gathered nobility until they silenced themselves once again. "Fine. You are absolved of responsibility," he said after a few moments. "It is a shame, though. Despite its reliance on a half-breed, the plan was truly inspired. I would have liked to see it come to fruition, if only because it would have ensured a more rapid rise to dominance for us. No matter, I have another reason for summoning all of you." Those at the table stared silently at the Duke, while he exchanged the papers in his hand for another sheaf. The crows spotted an orc scout who most certainly saw us. This scout was able to slip away from us so the orcs know where we are. Then we must put our plan into action sooner than expected, one of the nobles said. Plan? Quite true. Though it would seem that the orcs are content to continue their attack on the capital, they might change their minds and march on us at any time. We outnumber them, do we not? Another noble asked. Yes, but they have mages and their leaders seem knowledgeable of our kind. Even if we were to win, we would lose many and still have to face Lofin's army. No, we cannot risk a confrontation with the orcs at this stage. We must move forward. Pardon me, your grace, I interrupted. Move forward with what? I have heard of no plan. Neither have many at this table, the Duke chuckled. I shall elaborate then. We are going to invade our former siblings, specifically the lands to the south known as the Deep Wild Forest. Shocked silence was the only reply. I was stunned, but managed to get a hold of myself and close my gaping mouth. This couldn't be real. If anyone knows how to destroy a vampire, it would be the fair folk. They most certainly would not be willing to cohabitate either. They see us as unclean and strike us down without mercy, as one would crush an inconvenient bug. Worse than that, they can be reborn almost instantly. If we were mortals, our actions in trying to wipe them out would have some impact on them. But the wilds and their wilder would pay no heed to our intentions. The fair folk will just keep coming, no matter how many of them we kill. But the Duke knows this. He must. Why? I asked meekly. What could there be to gain? Reinforcements, the Duke chuckled again. As you know, there have been many experiments regarding vampirism over the centuries. One such experiment saw a rather interesting result. Misgiel rose from his seat and set the papers down. We can force the spirit of a wilder into the body of a mortal, he said, leaning onto the table. This makes the fair folk very useful to us. All it takes is a quick ritual that creates something quite useful. Bring it in! The doors opened, and two servants guided a hooded figure into the room. We were able to identify what this thing was before the servants were able to remove the hood, though. A scent that mixed blood, death, and power, the unmistakable smell of a vampire. The servants removed the hood from the creature's head, and a small gasp escaped one of the nobles as its features came into view. The servants stepped back with a bow, presenting us with a drow that was definitely a full vampire. He regarded us with a vacant gaze as the murmurs began. That's a vampire, not a half-breed, one noble whispered. How is such a thing possible? The Duke raised his hand for silence once more, and the din died down. He grabbed the drow by the arm and dragged him over to the table. As you can see, this ritual works on drow as well, he said. But despite what your senses are telling you, this creature is not a true vampire. Allow me a quick demonstration. Misgiel picked up a dagger from the table. Take this dagger, he said to the drow. The drow took the dagger. Place your left hand upon the table. The drow mindlessly complied. Pin your hand to the table, the Duke said coldly. In a flash, the drow sunk the dagger through his hand and into the table. Cries of surprise and alarm rang throughout the nobility, but I found myself enraptured by this development. A vampire that will do whatever you tell it to do. Interesting. This vampire-like creature has no agency. It will do as I tell it to do, without a single question or concern. As such, it isn't really a vampire, the Duke laughed. It's a mindless slave, a true thrall. Whomever performs the ritual forms a direct connection to the thrall that allows one, with some practice, to give commands by thought. My experimentation thus far has not found a maximum distance for this effect. Truly remarkable. Fantastic, even. There's just one problem. How will we capture the fair folk? I asked. We will march our forces and slaves to the very border of the Deep Wild Forest. From there, we abduct as many of the wilder as we can using iron. Iron is fatal to them, though, one of the nobles said. Yes, but before it kills them, it weakens them. We will use this time to perform the ritual and make them into thralls. Misgiel took the dagger out of the drow's hand. It didn't flinch. I had hoped to use the element of surprise, but it would seem that they are somehow prepared for us. Still, I'd gladly trade brood for thralls. They eat a lot less. The Duke smiled as a few laughs came from the gathered nobility. My mind began reeling at the possibilities. Vampires, mindless or not, are much stronger and faster than brood can ever hope to be. They are also much more difficult to truly kill. With enough thralls, we would be unstoppable. When we run out of slaves or wilder, we will invade the Orcish lands and replenish our numbers, Misgiel said as he took his seat. We will need to be fast to take advantage of their preoccupation with Lofin. And when we replenish our numbers? What then? I asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it said. Then we take back the Night Kingdom. Nick Smith. We're getting close now, Larry said. These Fae and I are familiar with one another, so please allow me the honor of introductions. Don't worry, Rebus laughed. I know better than to give my name to a Fae. Well, actually, these Fae already have names, so there's no need to be Just a joke. Ah, right. The forest around us creaked and moaned as we continued walking. The weather had changed from sunny to overcast and windy not long after we'd entered the woods. Thankfully, it wasn't raining, but the smell was there. We should pick up the pace, I said. It's going to rain soon. I think it would have already if it was gonna, Nash replied. You can't smell it? I asked with a puzzled expression. Smell what? The rain? Yeah. Of course you can smell the fucking rain, he sighed. 'Cause that makes sense, right? Why not? You really can't smell that? No, damn it! The fuck do you even mean? I smell wind and trees and dirt. I don't smell nothing special either, Rebus added. Me neither, Mako shrugged. The rest of the group shrugged and shook their heads, except for Yulk, who was stroking his chin. He was so lost in thought that he stumbled over a root, but caught himself with his staff. He turned to look at the root in question with a very confused expression. Look, I don't know how to explain a smell, I said, exasperated. All I know is that it smells like it's going to rain soon. He's right, it is, a voice said from behind us. We froze and turned around but didn't see anything amiss. Gally reached for his bow, but Rebus stopped him with a gesture. We stood silent and listened for a moment. Then Hino stepped forward. Who's there? He asked. You're looking right at me, the disembodied voice replied. We exchanged confused glances. Okay, but that doesn't answer my question. Hino crossed his arms. While you're at it, why can't I see you? Listen, little thing, I was just trying to be helpful. It's taken a lot of effort to hold on to my leaves with all this damn wind. One of the trees rotated slightly. Ain't really got the energy for introductions, and we don't need to know each other anyway, so why don't you bugger off now? Yeah, fair enough, Hino said. Let's get going. Hino turned and began to walk before the shock wore off for the rest of us. Larry levitated after him, and the rest of us had to jog to catch up. So, the fuck? Rebus asked once we caught up. Dunno, Hino shrugged. Didn't want to find out the hard way, though. Since when are there trees that can talk? Nash asked. All trees can talk, but not usually via vocalizations, Larry explained. That was a grasp. They dwell within old-growth forests and interact with the fair folk pretty often. That one was more social than most. Didn't seem very social to me, Gally said. Precisely. Most of them are quite wary of mortals. A deep-seated prejudice that has sat within them since times long forgotten to everyone else, Larry said, then shrugged. At least that's what the Fae have told me. I didn't even realize that the grasp can present as trees, Yulk said casually. I was under the impression that they typically take the form of massive agaric growths. Oh, what? Rebus asked before I could. Agaric, Gally answered. It's a type of mushroom. So there's big talking mushrooms somewhere out there? Could be in here too, Mako chuckled menacingly. You never know. Yeah, don't like that. Some things just shouldn't be able to talk. Mako chuckled louder and stopped as we came to a sudden clearing. The sound of wind abruptly ceased, and a sense of mystery hung in the air. Larry floated in front of us and beckoned for us to follow him. I've come to call in a favor if it's convenient, Larry called out. And those with you? We looked around for the owner of the voice but saw no one. Interested parties, and insofar as I can tell, friends of the fair folk, the Lich replied. Some of which are proven as such. Yes, Nick, Nash, Yulk, allies of the Deep Wild. Permissions were granted. Not here, though. Far from here in more ways than one. Name your payment for the debt we owe. I humbly request the aid of your expertise with language and puzzles. This may be a challenging task, and so I am willing to discuss compensation if need be. A challenge, you say? With an audible pop, a figure enveloped in bright light appeared in front of Larry. My first instinct was to shield my eyes from the brightness, but I quickly realized that the light wasn't hurting my eyes at all. Confused, I lowered my hand and looked at everyone else. Their confusion met my own, and we all looked at the Fae as if it weren't shining like a star. It was nude, androgynous, and levitating at the same height as Larry. It held its hands cupped just below its sternum and had its eyes closed. Somehow, though, I could tell that it was still staring at me. Gah! Rebus shuddered. I don't mean any kind of offense or rudeness, but that's a creepy sort of vibe you're giving off. As is intended, then. The Fae winked without moving its eyelids. Larry held up his hand as a warning for silence, and we obliged. May I introduce you? The Lich asked the Fae. No need, Virn replied. They know me now, and I them, and it was true I knew of the Arch-Fae of the Court of Stillness. Its name, Virn, granted by a mysterious being that leaves a hole in my mind. It loves the way that ice slowly forms when autumn first arrives. It hates the smell of flowers and has a flair for the dramatic, even compared to the other Wilder. It once kicked Mumuldobran in the non-physical equivalent of a dick for becoming a king and leaving the court. It felt as if I'd known it all my life, but had amnesia about how we met. I knew of Virn, but not of the Court of Stillness or why it was angry with Mumuldobran for leaving. The word Wilder popped into my head, and from context I was able to guess its meaning, though I'd never heard it before. When these discrepancies came to mind, my stomach tied itself in knots. I want you to know that I did not enjoy that, Ten said angrily. Enjoy what? I asked. Whatever that thing just did. All my neuromapping just flew right out the window and into a puddle. Don't think any of them would make interesting playthings for us, except Nick. Though playing with Nick would lead to some rather serious problems, Virn sighed. Nash might be fun for some of the fairies, but his hot temper would quickly escalate to the point of ruining things. The Bone Fae would love Mako, but he would break too quickly. Rebus would entertain the sirens or sprites for a time, but the issue of keeping it in his pants would limit that enjoyment to half a day at most. Hino and Gali are too cautious for play. Ithrima and Yulk are too curious for play. Congratulations, you are all safe. For now. I see. Well, I suppose that saves us some time, Larry said. Though the veiled threats are unnecessary, Virn. I came for aid that you owe to me, and these mortals are under my protection. Let's not be rude. Virn knows no other way to communicate, another voice called from behind us. We turned and watched a skeleton enter the clearing. It walked right through our little group and up to Larry. Something about it felt off, as if its bones didn't all belong to the same being. It took me a second to realize that it was a bone fae, like King Horth back in the deep wild forest, but not wearing any facsimiles of flesh and fabric. The bone fae stopped in front of Larry. The two skulls regarded each other with their empty sockets and fleshless faces. It is a pleasure to see you again, Nerton, Larry said. Same, Larry, the bone fae replied, then raised a bony fist. Fight me! Everyone, including Virn, froze for a moment. Nerton pumped his fist in the air, causing a rattling noise. Larry regarded the bone fae carefully, then shook his head sadly. We don't have time, I'm afraid, the Lich said. I am tasked. Who tasks you? Nerton asked. I'll destroy them, then we can fight. I task me. Then we can... No, but perhaps at a later time. Larry held up his hand gently. There is knowledge to be obtained. Oh, about your lost flesh? Perhaps, but potentially intriguing knowledge regardless. Nerton thought for a moment. Fine, I'll hold off the challenge for now. May we double our usual bet, though? Of course, Larry nodded. I will want your rarest matching tibia and fibula. Fine by me. I'll be wanting your mandible and sternum. Larry chuckled and reached into his satchel while the rest of us shared concerned glances. He pulled out the tablets and then offered them to Virn. The Arch-Fae looked confused for a moment, glanced at its hands, then sighed. The light surrounding Virn disappeared as it opened its eyes, grabbed the tablets, and began its examination. Its demeanor made a subtle shift from perturbed to alarmed, then carefully neutral. Before I could ask why, it cleared its throat and looked back to Larry. What language do you need these deciphered into? Virn asked. They are written in code, the Lich replied. I am aware, the Arch-Fae replied testily. What language do you need? Larry turned to me inquisitively. Can you decipher them into English? I asked. Both the Arch-Fae and the Bone Fae visibly winced at my question. Oh, sorry, I apologized instinctively. What's... Yes, I can decipher them into their original language, Virn interrupted me. Wait here, I'll return soon. You'll be safe from the rain in this clearing. Virn disappeared with a pop, and Nerton regarded us nervously. His gaze fell on me more than the others. I'm going to take my leave as well, the Bone Fae said. We'll duel some other time, old friend. Very well, Larry nodded. Nerton turned and walked away from us at a brisk pace. Several questions seemed to hang in the air, but nobody said anything. I contemplated the behavior of both Fae. Why did they flinch when I said English? How did Virn know the tablet was encoded? How did it even know what English is? Well, would you look at that? Rebus pointed above us, interrupting my thoughts. It really is raining. Gods damn it, Nash muttered. Master Vampire Kirain Yith. Well, well, well. This is a surprising result, the Void whispered. What is? What's happening? I demanded. The others have conferred. A decision has been reached. And what was there? My eyes snapped open and I gasped involuntarily as pain shrieked through my body. The smell of burnt flesh stung my nostrils. I tried to stand, but remained firmly on my back, as if my limbs would not heed my commands. You sure we can't eat? Someone asked. No bad meats. Smell it. We gots to burn it, someone else said. Recognition of these speech patterns tickled at my mind, but the pain prevented cognizance. What is the meaning of this? I shouted as I once again tried and failed to move. Ah! It living. So? It can't hurt you, scaredy scales. Keep cuttin'. I contorted my neck to look around and saw a few kobolds standing around roaring fire. A kobold with a short sword began to approach me as another threw a severed leg into the fire. I glanced down and realized with horror that I didn't have any arms, and the leg that just went into the fire was probably my own. No! I screamed. A blinding pain rippled through me as the sword bit into my torso, slicing away precious flesh. Regenerate, I have to buy time to regenerate. The dryness I felt in my mouth grew more intense as I focused on trying to regrow my limbs. Please, I whimpered. Stop! I'll just go! Nope, a kobold interrupted me. You hurt the Lord. If you live, you might do it again. Oh, plus you killed my friends and family. Yeah, that wasn't a very nice thing to do to Seameath. Bad sucker, the kobold with a sword said as it threw another piece of me into the flames. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never hurt anyone again, I lied. Just please stop! The sword plunged into my flesh once more. The kobolds chuckled cruelly at my screams. Think he's small enough yet? One of them asked. Please, I begged hoarsely. Yeah, another one replied. But let's chop the head first. Still has sharp teeth to bite with. No! I can give you things. My words turned into a gurgle as the blade carved its way into my throat, sawing back and forth. I desperately tried to bite at the kobold, but the muscles in my neck wouldn't bring my head around. I felt the sword crack the bones in my neck and tried to scream, but could only flap my mouth in response to the pain. A hand grabbed my hair and lifted me into the air, giving me a view of my mutilated body. All that was left of me was my barely recognizable chest. I had only been able to regenerate the stumps of my shoulders. The kobold who grabbed my head began to walk toward the fire. Make sure all the meats go into the fire, the one carrying me said. Otherwise, the sucker will grow back. What about the leakings? Granny said that they need their meats to come back. The blood's fine where it is, but the Lord will want it cleaned. Then we'll cleanse it. For the Lord. For the Lord. The reality of my situation finally sunk in as the kobold wound up to throw me. I'm going to die. I finally found the power I've wanted for so long, the power to make things the way they should be, and now I'm going to die. It's not right. It's not fair. I experienced a brief moment of weightlessness and panic before I impacted amongst the flames. Intense pain was all I could feel, and the only thing I could hear over the roar of the fire was the sound of my skin sizzling. All I could see were flames licking at my face, before my eyes melted in my skull. I longed for the end to finally come while I silently screamed, cursing my mother and father, the vampires, the inbred bastard king, the orcs, the adventurers, and even the gods, everyone that led me to this fate. Then the pain ebbed, and the void returned. A sickening laughter echoed within my mind. Confusion and anger whirled within me. What? Am I dead? I asked. Is this the afterlife? No. What you have just experienced is the fate that you have been spared by the mercy of those higher than you, the wicked god answered. Though that mercy wears thin. There were many who craved your demise, and you were only spared by one vote. One? Vote? Indeed. Out of the dozens of votes that were cast, one singular vote defined the majority and spared your middling existence. Middling? I demanded as my anger flared. Quite. You acted haughtily, under the mistaken impression that by becoming a master vampire, you had also become supremely powerful. You were warned that a challenge was coming, and failed to take any reasonable precautions, thereby failing the challenge entirely. You didn't even manage to actually kill any of your opponents. I have been an immeasurable disappointment. Thus far, you've been nothing more than a failure, and those are extraordinarily common. There isn't anything spectacular about a failure. We expected far better from one who dares to hold ambitions to conquer the world. The words tore into me, exposing the inadequacies and insecurities that I'd buried deep within. There was nothing that I could think of in reply, no argument that I could make. Even now, as I mentally revisit the fight, I can see the mistakes I made. Stupid and foolish mistakes that I should have been smart enough to avoid. Yes, you shouldn't have sent your minions into a choke point, limiting their superior maneuverability and simultaneously leaving you undefended. You should have been less cautious in expanding your forces. You should have this, you should have that, it said impatiently. But you didn't. We expected strategy, not stupidity. We expected brutality, not cowardice. Your fear of failure ensured it. I found myself unable to be angry at these words even as they bit into me. Though the tone was condescending, it was a well-deserved chiding. I should have been smarter, should have taken this more seriously. To hells with the gods and their challenges, this was my life that I threw away with my stupid mistakes. What now? I asked, my ego completely deflated. In accordance with the compact of the highest one, you will be spared, and I will speed up your regeneration. From there, do as you will. Perhaps your homeland will be more accommodating to a failure such as yourself, the god laughed cruelly. Perhaps you'll even learn the secrets that the other vampires have kept from you, and we'll get to see how those secrets shape you. Or perhaps you'll stumble yet again and die a pathetic death. We will be silent to you from now on, and we will not intercede on your behalf again. Begone. My eyes snapped open and I gasped involuntarily as the shock of what had happened ran through my mind. I scrambled to a sitting position, breathing heavily and checking to make certain that I was intact. Tears ran down my face as I gripped my arms and legs, the memories of my demise still fresh. The cold of the dungeon floor barely registered upon my nude form, but the sound of padded feet and chattering coming from the entrance hall sent a chill down my spine. Kobolds. Conflicting thoughts surged to the front of my consciousness. Fight or flight. I've killed several dozen kobolds thus far, and that was before I became a master. It would be a simple matter to kill more of them, and it would make me feel better about the trauma I had just endured. They wouldn't stand a chance, but if I kill the kobolds, it will broadcast my survival if the adventurers return to this dungeon. There had been a kobold that had accompanied the adventurers. If the same kobold is with this group and I kill it, they may hunt me down. The murder of a companion, pet or otherwise, is the perfect motivation for revenge. I decided that leaving would be the wisest choice, and scrambled to my feet. After a moment of stumbling, I fled deeper into the dungeon. I grabbed a robe and cloak, threw them on, and jogged through the rear exit of the dungeon and into the dilapidated manor. The sun shone upon my face through a hole in the roof, and I gratefully breathed in the outside air. Mindful of my appearance, I concentrated until I felt my face shift into the visage of Habis. The homeless elf would serve me one last time as my mask. Carefully noting that the adventurers may have committed this face to memory, I decided to find a new one as soon as possible. With this ability, though, I will have no trouble gathering intelligence on what is happening within the Night Kingdom. Assuming anyone knows, that is. With one more deep breath, I raised the hood of my cloak and left the manor behind.